The Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold. Hi, everybody. I'm actually recording tonight's podcast on Saturday afternoon. And I'm doing that because I am in Istanbul, Turkey, and it's 7 hours later. I wanted to air the podcast initially on a Sunday evening. We get really good viewers at that point, and I didn't want to do it that early in the morning, my time. So I'm recording it on Saturday, but you're seeing it live for the first time on Sunday. And of course, a lot of you don't watch it live anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, first I want to comment on Gdansk, Poland, where we just arrived this afternoon. We left Poland this morning and flew down to Istanbul, but I really love that city. Beautiful city. I couldn't recommend it more. I never even thought about going to Gdansk, except I got that boat from Sunreef, and so we needed to go there to visit the shipyard and work on the design of the boat. But I'm really glad I was there, and I'm looking forward to coming back again next year when we pick up the boat. But if any of you happen to be in Europe, it's a great city that I think should not be missed. There were a lot of other Americans that I ran into, so apparently I'm one of the few people that didn't realize what a beautiful city it happens to be, or at least a number of Americans know about it, and they were there. Anyway, let's get started by talking about the big news that came out on Friday from the Labor Department. Of course, it was the first Friday of the month. And so we get the official government jobs report for the month of June. And, once again, superficially, the way it's reported in the media, it was another beat. They were expecting 189,000 jobs created, and we ended up exceeding that with 206,000 jobs. So it was above 206,000. In fact, Biden once again bragged that the jobs that were created were over 200,000 for the month. Of course, he took credit for those jobs. But as is normally the case, once you look beneath the surface, and you don't have to look deep beneath the surface, you get another very weak jobs report. Let's start with their downward revisions, because there were quite a few downward revisions. Both of the prior months were revised down. So April was revised down by 57,000 jobs, and May was revised down by 54,000 jobs. That's not insignificant. In fact, I think both of those months with the revisions, had they been reported accurately the first time, these jobs numbers would have been misses instead of beats. So the combined elimination of jobs that were previously reported as having been created was 110,000. So it really wasn't a 17,000 job beat. It was a 93,000 job miss. But again, the character of the jobs, it's still low paying, part-time jobs. In fact, if you just look over the last year, the government claims credit for 2.6 million jobs being created. But within that number, 1.55 million full-time jobs were lost. So all of the jobs that were created were part-time jobs. And in fact, over the past year, only 195,000 more people are employed now than were employed then. And of course, they're employed part-time, not full-time. But pretty much all these jobs were created for people who were already employed and who are now moonlighting in second or third jobs. And that is why, again, Joe Biden remains so unpopular, because the economy is actually very weak, because a lot of people are struggling to get by. Yes, they have 2 or 3 more jobs than they used to have, but they're not happy about that. They would prefer not to need these jobs, but they have no choice. But I think even worse was the poor performance of the private sector. We were supposed to have 160,000 private sector jobs created. Instead, it was only 136,000. And the prior month's 229,000 private sector jobs was reduced to just 193,000. But over a third of all the jobs that were created during the month were government jobs. We don't want more government jobs. We can't afford more government jobs. Where is the government getting the money to hire these people? It's borrowing it. We're going deeper into debt. And these are not productive jobs. In fact, every time the government hires somebody, it generally makes the private sector less productive because the government workers get in the way of productivity. They don't enhance productivity, they reduce it. So, because we have more people working for government, we're going to have larger budget deficits because we have to borrow the money to pay their salaries. Now, they're going to go spend that money. So, that's inflationary because they're bidding up prices for goods and services that they didn't help produce or provide. Right? All these government workers could take their paychecks and buy stuff just like people in the private sector. The difference is the people in the private sector actually added to the economic pot, whereas the people in the government sector subtracted. Now, of course, not all government workers are a net drain. I mean, there are some workers that may, in fact, help, but by and large, the vast majority hurt. So the fact that we're creating all these government jobs is not a good thing. Of course, in the birth death model, they assumed 59,000 jobs were created, which is a big chunk of the total. Now, I know they make some adjustments, so you can't just subtract one for one, but I know that there is a big bias that the government has in just assuming jobs were created when the reality is they were probably destroyed. So it really is distorting these numbers. And so you could take them all with a grain of salt because they likely highly exaggerate the number of jobs that were actually created. Look at manufacturing jobs. We lost 8,000 manufacturing jobs. And the prior month, they reported that we gained 8,000 manufacturing jobs. They eliminated all of them. The government now says that it was zero, that no manufacturing jobs at all were created in May, and 8,000 were lost in June. Again, these are the productive jobs that we need, people making stuff. We're not making stuff, we're consuming more, bigger trade deficits. This is a weak report that is also inflationary. So it's stagflation, a weak economy, and more inflationary pressures. The labor force participation rate stayed at 62.6, which is a very weak number. And significantly, the unemployment rate rose to 4.1%. It was 4% in the prior month, unrevised, and it went up to 4.1. That is significant. It's the highest unemployment rate in about 2.5 years. But what's more significant is the actual unemployment rate, which is the U6 rate. That is 7.4%. That's a lot of unemployed people, 7.4. If you count all the people that are unemployed, and even the U6 number doesn't count everybody. It counts the people who are working part-time, but who want to work full-time. And we know there's a lot of those because we keep creating part-time jobs and not full-time jobs. So some of the people who are working those part-time jobs may be still looking for a full-time job and they haven't found one. They should be unemployed and they're counted in U6. They're just not in U3, which is the number that everybody hears. And of course, they also don't count discouraged workers, people who are unemployed and they gave up looking because they couldn't find any work. They're counted in U6. They're not in the official number. But long-term discouraged people, after a year, if they're still discouraged and it's been a year, they don't even count in U6. They used to. But here is the scam, and this is why it's a lie. You know, Biden likes to talk about how Trump lies. Well, he lies when he talks about unemployment being low. It's not low. It's actually very high historically. 7.4% is the rate. That is the U6 rate. That used to be the U3 rate. What happened was in 1994, that's when the government created U6. What they did is they took U3, which was actually created in 1940, and they took out the part-time workers who want to work full-time and the discouraged workers. They removed them from U3 and created a new U6 that had never existed. And the media completely ignores U6. They only talk about U3. But up until 1994, U3 was U6. So if you really want to put today's unemployment in context, if you want to claim that it's low based on history, what you have to compare is the current U6 number to the U3 number that existed prior to 1994. And I happened to do that before this podcast. And what I found was if you go back to 1940, when we first started U3, there were only 2 years in the 1940s where the unemployment rate was as high or higher than it is now. And that was 1940 and 1941, which was the tail end of the Depression, just before the Second World War. And as soon as the war started, unemployment dropped. And so unemployment from 1942 to 1949 was lower than it is today, considerably. But now, if you look at the 1950s and 1960s, there wasn't a single year during those 2 decades where unemployment was as high as it is right now. So, in other words, under Joe Biden, the unemployment rate is higher than it was at any point in the 1950s or the 1960s. So, how is this low unemployment? If it's higher than it was every single year of those decades, and a lot of the years it was in the threes and fours. Now it's so we have historically high unemployment. You got to go to the 1970s to find an unemployment rate as high as the one we've got right now, 0.4. And it was only the last few years of the 1970s. So from 1970 to 1979, there was only 1 year that the unemployment rate was higher than it is right now. That was 1975. Oh, and 1976. So only 2 years in the 1970s. And that's supposed to be a horrible decade, stagflation, Jimmy Carter, all the bad stuff that happened. Yet in all but 2 years of the 1970s, unemployment was lower than it is right now. Now, look at the 1980s. During the 1980s, there were only 3 years during the 1980s when unemployment was higher than it is right now. And that was 81, 82, 83. We were in the worst recession since the Great Depression. Coming out of the Jimmy Carter days, the Fed had interest rates up at 20%, right? We were really trying to fight inflation. That brought about a severe recession. So only during the latter 1970s and early 1980s did you have unemployment higher than it is right now. And so every year from 1984 through the rest of the 80s, the unemployment rate was lower than it is right now. And of course, again, back then, the U3 rate included all the discouraged workers. It didn't kick out the people who have been discouraged more than a year. I would guess that if today's U6 rate included all the people that were included in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, I think that the unemployment rate that we have right now under Biden is higher than it was in any of those 50 years. So if unemployment that we have right now is so high, higher than it was in any decade, how can Biden possibly claim that we have low unemployment? How can Powell claim that, oh, everything is great because the unemployment rate is so low? The unemployment rate that they're looking at is a complete farce. You've got to look at U6, especially if you're going to try to compare the rate we have now to prior decades. Now, if you want to compare the rate we have now to the 2000s or the 2010s, well, then it's the same thing. And so the rate is low if you want to compare it to those time frames, but not really, because the labor force participation rate is so much lower. So the real reason that unemployment is lower now than it was under, let's say, Trump or under Obama is because so many people left the labor force. But unemployment was still much higher under those presidents than it was in the prior decades. In fact, that's the reason that the government made the change in 1994. They wanted to report lower unemployment numbers to the public. And so they rigged the system. Same thing they did with the CPI. Inflation was a problem. How do you make the problem go away? Lie about it. Don't tell the truth. That's why when you look at these rigged CPI and unemployment numbers, and you come to the conclusion that we got a strong economy with low unemployment, and you don't understand why Biden is so unpopular, it's because the way we're keeping track of these economic statistics is wrong. The real statistics, if we measure the economy the way we did prior to 1994, you can see why so many people are so miserable. Earlier in the week, we did get other economic data points that came out to support the narrative that the economy is weakening, or rather, to challenge the false narrative that the economy is strong. We got the ISM manufacturing number. That came out weaker than expected. The consensus was 49.1, and the actual number was 48.5. But as weak as the manufacturing number was, the service sector was even worse. And in fact, last month, we got a big reaction in the markets when the ISM service index came out much higher than expected for May. We got 53.8, and that was like an aberration. And at the time, that's what I said. I said, look, this is a one-off. We've had really weak numbers, and this is just a one-time event, and the market shouldn't get excited. Well, the anticipation was for another strong number, 53, not quite as strong as the 53.8, but they were looking for 53. The number came out at 48.8, complete collapse, right back to the lousy numbers we had before June. In fact, the range of estimates was from a low of 52 to a high of 55.5. So nobody expected the ISM service index to collapse, but that's exactly what it did. In fact, that's exactly what I said was going to happen when we got that ridiculously strong one-off number a month ago. Also, factory orders for May, weak again. They were looking for up 0.2. We got minus 0.5, and we revised the prior month from up 0.7 to up 0.4. So more weakness in manufacturing. Again, we lost manufacturing jobs this month, and that's why. Trade deficit, again, didn't come out worse than expected, but it was another huge number at $75.1 billion. That's the unified trade deficit in goods and services for May. Nobody talks about it. It subtracts from GDP, but it's also highly inflationary because it's going to put a lot of pressure on the dollar. And of course, we also got the ADP employment report that was overshadowed by the government number that came out on Friday. That one came out a day early on Wednesday because, of course, July 4th, how could I forget, was Independence Day holiday. And so the markets were closed. Oh, by the way, I saw Joe Biden kind of confuse the 4th of July with Christmas when he spoke and he said, ho, 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 a happy 4th of July. I was expecting him to say Merry Christmas. Maybe he caught himself and realized, but I don't know where the Santa Claus thing came out. But the markets were closed in observance of Independence Day. And so we got the ADP report always comes out on Wednesday. And that was 150,000 versus the 161,000 that had been expected, so slightly below. But we got the Challenger job cut number. That one came out on Wednesday, which was a day early. Not as many job cuts as the prior month, but still, again, a big number, 48,000, 786,000 layoffs announced in the month of June. So again, weak economic data, weak jobs data, strong inflation data. All of this is why the odds for rate cuts this year, 2 rate cuts, in fact, have increased. But of course, it also increases the odds, which are already pretty high, that Donald Trump is elected to his second term, and he ends up being the first and president since Grover Cleveland, who was one of my favorite presidents. In fact, I wish Donald Trump could find his inner Grover Cleveland and have an administration similar to Grover Cleveland, who happened to be a Democrat, probably the last great Democratic president, Grover Cleveland. But he's also the last president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. And if Trump is reelected, again, he'll be the only president since Grover Cleveland to accomplish that. Anyway, we got a quick commercial break. We'll take a break and we'll be right back. Here's some quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your products or services, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you'll reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware requirement, access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. By popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible finance program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/gold. Well, the public may not like the weak economy, but Wall Street does. Stocks rallied on Friday. In fact, the S&P and NASDAQ, led by big tech, made new all-time record highs, at least nominal highs in terms of dollars. In fact, for the week, the NASDAQ was up 2.8%, and the triple Qs, which is just the biggest of the NASDAQ stocks, was up 3%. Not as big a gain in the S&P 500, although record territory, up 1.3% on the week. The Dow was up 0.78%. Only the Russell 2000 ended up down on the week, probably more economically sensitive. A lot of smaller companies that are more sensitive to the weak economic data. The big tech stocks, they're the ones that are more looking for rate cuts to boost their valuations for all the growth that the markets are inferring is going to happen into the future. But also gold. Gold had a nice week. It closed above 2,390, or right about there. So close to 2,400 again, just about 2% off its all-time record high. Gold was up 2.64% on the week. Silver also had a strong week. Gold stocks had a good week. The GDX up 5.3% on the week. GDXJ up 5.85% on the week. That index now, or the GDX, is only about 3% below its record high. So it has been gaining back some of what it lost, but the indexes are still way behind where they should be. I mean, gold is holding at a very high price. I expect a lot of these gold mining companies to report much better earnings than the street expects, because the price of gold is staying at much higher prices for a much longer period of time than these analysts penciled into their earnings forecast. So I still think that this is the best way right now to play the gold sector is through these mining stocks. I think they're still dirt cheap. There's incredible value there. People should be buying these stocks. I think the best way to do it, if you're not going to pick them on your own, is to let my company, Euro Pacific Asset Management, manage a portfolio. We've got Adrian Day, who is managing separately managed accounts of gold stocks. So you can call up the representatives at Europac.com about having us set up a separately managed account for you in the mining stocks, or you can buy my gold fund that Adrian manages, the Euro Pacific Gold Fund. You can buy it no load at any discount broker, Schwab, Fidelity. All the major firms have my mutual funds, all my mutual funds for that matter, on the platform. But if you want to get into the gold mining stocks, you can get into the Euro Pacific Gold Fund. EPIGX, I believe, is the symbol for the no load version of that fund. Gold itself, of course, I like physical silver still. It's back above 30. In fact, it's back above $31 an ounce. We did get below 29 again, very briefly. And again, I think 29 is for silver what 2,000 used to be for gold. If you get a chance to buy it below that level, you definitely want to do it. The problem is there may not be another chance to buy it that cheap. I think buying silver even above 31, 32 in that area is still very cheap. I think pretty soon 50 is going to be the new 30. In fact, I think 50 is going to be the support for silver. So to buy some physical silver, you want to talk to the representatives at Shift Gold. I mean, the name is Shift Gold, but it's Shift Gold and silver. In fact, we sell platinum and palladium as well. mean, those metals are probably also pretty good buys, but right now I'd put money into silver. So you can talk to the Shift Gold representatives about buying some silver, particularly if you're in Bitcoin. I think it's a great time to switch out of fool's gold into the real thing, or maybe even silver, or better yet, maybe sell your Bitcoin and buy some gold and silver mining stocks. Bitcoin had a rough week, although it's managing to recover so far this weekend. I'm watching live as I'm recording on Saturday. Well, it's actually evening here in Istanbul, but I'm looking at the price of Bitcoin getting close now back to 58,000 for Bitcoin, but that's still quite a bit lower than it was. Although the low on Friday morning for Bitcoin, early Friday morning, was 53,550. Now that's a 27.5% drop from the peak that Bitcoin hit in March of this year. But in terms of gold, and people forget that you shouldn't be pricing Bitcoin in dollars. If you're saying Bitcoin is digital gold, well, then gold should be your reference, right? Gold is real money anyway because of all the inflation with dollars. So when Bitcoin was at 53,550 on Friday morning, it was 38.5% below its peak price in gold, which was set in November of 2021. That's almost 3 years ago that Bitcoin peaked. And even when Bitcoin was at almost 74,000 in dollar terms, it still didn't take out its high in gold terms. And it may never will. It may never do that. I think that there's a very good chance that the high in Bitcoin in terms of gold has already been hit. So all the hype, all these Bitcoin ETFs still wasn't able to move Bitcoin to a new high. In fact, I'm pretty sure that on Friday morning, when Bitcoin ETFs opened for trading, based on where they were, I would guess that maybe as much as 70% of the people who bought these ETFs since they started in January were losing money. Right? A lot of money came in. In fact, when Michael Saylor leveraged up to buy more Bitcoin, the price was well above 60,000 when he did that. And it dropped all the way down to 53. Now, I don't think we're done with this sell off. There's a lot of selling coming. The Mt. Gox Bitcoin are hitting the market after 12 years, or I forget how many years it was ago, maybe not quite that many years, 10, 8 years, where Mt. Gox shut down and a lot of Bitcoin were locked up. People are finally getting those Bitcoin back. I'm not sure how many Bitcoin they get relative to what they had, but the value is so much higher now. Even if they're not getting back all their Bitcoin, what they're getting back is probably much more valuable in terms of the market price than it was when they lost access. And so people that all of a sudden get these Bitcoin are clearly going to sell them. The German government was selling some Bitcoin. And so this is putting pressure on the market. But a lot of people want to dismiss this. Oh, it's just a one-off thing. We just got to get through this selling and then Bitcoin's off to the moon. But remember, what the narrative has been is that it's institutions. The institutional demand is there. We have all this institutional buying. Oh, really? Because if there was so much institutional buying, they would be contacting Mt. Gox and trying to buy up that Bitcoin off market. If there's a big seller and you want volume, you would want to approach that seller and make them a bid. Hey, no reason to sell that Bitcoin in the market. I'll buy it off you. I want to get it. The fact that there aren't a lot of institutions stepping up and trying to buy this supply shows me that the institutional demand is overhyped. It really isn't there. But I still haven't seen any kind of capitulation from these ETF buyers. Because, in fact, even on Friday, the market rallied pretty much all day after gapping lower. So we didn't see a lot of ETF selling. I think that's coming. I'm not sure how low the price is going to have to get to really flush these speculators out, but I think they're going to be flushed out. They're going to throw in the towel. Maybe it's when we crack 50,000. Maybe it's when we crack 40,000. In fact, when we crack about 38,000, that'll be the point where every single person who bought a Bitcoin ETF is losing money. And some of them will be losing a lot of money. But I think at that point, they're just going to cut and run. and then you're going to see the bottom really drop out of the market. So before that happens, I think people should sell now and buy gold and silver while it's cheap and buy the mining stocks. Anyway, speaking about the bottom dropping out of something, the bottom has dropped out of the Joe Biden reelection campaign. If you look at what's happened over the past week, the odds of uh, um, Kamala Harris, don't want to mispronounce her name there, Kamala Harris, the odds that she's going to be the Democratic nominee have moved up considerably. She's now a slight favorite over Joe Biden. So the betting markets on Predicted now believe it's better than a 50-50 chance that Biden doesn't run for reelection. And Gavin Newsom has plunged. Everybody now realizes that if it's not Biden, it's Harris, which I think is great for Trump because I don't see how either of those two candidates have any chance of beating him. In fact, if you look at Predicted, Trump is about a 60% probability of winning the White House now, and that's about the highest he's been. And so, it's more likely than not that he's going to win against either of these candidates. But of course, if Biden is unfit to run for reelection because he's not, mentally there, he's got dementia, Alzheimer's, or some other type of uh, mental infirmary that really prevents him from, being president. Well, he should resign right now. And it's not about that he shouldn't run for reelection. He shouldn't be in office right now. In fact, the 25th Amendment actually provides for this exact situation. I don't know why it hasn't been evoked. It's probably because of political reasons, but there is a way for a president to be removed. Basically, if the vice president and the cabinet, a majority of the cabinet and the vice president, determine that the president is not capable of fulfilling his duties, which clearly Biden is not capable of doing, they're supposed to go to the Congress, go to the Speaker of the House and the majority leader in the Senate, and basically say the president is unfit and we're going to remove him. And, the vice president is going to become president. That's what's supposed to happen. And if the president claims, no, I'm fit, I disagree with the vice president and the cabinet, there's supposed to be a hearing, a trial where Congress is supposed to look into it, maybe get an independent physician to examine the president and make a determination whether or not the conclusions of the vice president and the cabinet are correct. And should the president be removed? I mean, clearly, the 25th Amendment in part was written exactly for the situation we have right now. I mean, I can't think of circumstances where you would have a president who was more deserving of being removed from office based on his mental faculties. I mean, Biden clearly should have been removed a while ago, not just after the debate when it's obvious to everybody. In fact, the most ridiculous thing about everything that's happening is the way the Democrats have reacted. Because prior to the debate debacle, the Democrats were uniform, not only in their, sharp as attack narrative, right? Everybody, when they talked about Biden, he was sharp as attack. He wasn't just sharp, he was sharp as attack, right? Everybody got that memo, but he's on his game. He's amazing. He's incredible. He's every bit the Biden he's ever been. Everybody was lying. Nobody was telling the truth. And the left wing media was accusing the Fox News or the right of fake news, making it all up. That all this talk about Joe Biden's mental faculties and being lost and being infirm, that was all just made up. It was fake news, that they were doctoring the images, they were using AI, and it was all just a right-wing conspiracy, which, of course, like most conspiracies, turned out to be true. It was only when the left, the Democrats on CNBC or CNN or MSNBC, were confronted with a live debate where the world could see what they were denying for so long, and they can no longer lie about it. all of a sudden, oh my God, we got to replace Biden, right? They don't want to reflect on all of the weeks and weeks and months of denial and the accusations that they made um, against the Republicans and the media, where they were claiming they were promoting fake news when the fake news was all coming from the Democrats and from the left. In fact, Biden sat down for an interview with George Stephanopoulos, and I guess he was trying to, you know, vindicate himself. This was a chance. Hey, it's a live interview, and I watched that. I didn't watch it live, but I watched it, actually a couple hours before I'm recording this podcast. And the most interesting thing about it, a couple things that were interesting. One was early in the interview, George Stephanopoulos asked Joe Biden if he watched the debate, right? Did you watch the debate? And instead of saying, yes, I watched it, or no, I didn't watch it, he thought for a minute and said, I don't think so. I don't think I watched it. Well, what do you mean he doesn't think he watched it? Doesn't he know? I mean, it was just last week or maybe this week. I mean, the debate wasn't that long ago. And Joe Biden doesn't even know whether or not he watched that debate. He doesn't have a memory. He thinks he didn't watch it, but he's not sure. I mean, that alone, right? Hey, you can't be president. You can't remember something that happened, that soon. How are you supposed to be president? But of course, to me, there's no way he didn't watch it, right? You're Joe Biden, right? And you just do this debate. And everybody says, oh my God, this was a disaster. This was the worst debate in the history of debates. You got to drop out of the race. Biden can't even run for reelection. It's that bad. You would think that one of the first things Joe Biden would want to do is, God, I got to see this. I couldn't have been that bad. Let me watch this debate, right? How can he not watch the debate? It's all anything is talking about. I mean, even, I'm sure every time you do a debate, you want to watch it because, there's another debate that he's supposed to do. Don't you want to watch the debate just to see, where you screwed up, what you could do better? I mean, I can't imagine any circumstances, especially given, the bomb that this debate was, right? Everybody's talking about it. How could he not have watched it? There's no way. Biden watched this debate. I'm sure he watched it more than once. So the question is, did Biden watch the debate and then he doesn't even remember that he watched the debate? Is his memory that bad? He doesn't even think he watched the debate? Or is he just lying, right? He makes a big deal about how Trump lies. He could easily be lying. He watched the debate and he doesn't want to admit it. Why? Because then he doesn't have to talk about it that much. Because had he told Stephanopoulos, yeah, I watched the debate, he might have been able to say, well, what did you feel? Right? How did you think you did? What were your impressions? Right. So he eliminated all those potentially embarrassing questions by lying and saying that he did not even watch the debate. But so either he's a liar or he can't even remember the fact that he watched that debate. And so neither of those is good. The other thing, multiple times, George Stephanopoulos asked Joe Biden, Joe, look, will you agree to have a test of your mental capacity, right? A independent doctor examine you and do a cognitive test and tell the American public what they find. Now, clearly, if Biden did not have dementia or any kind of mental infirmity, and there was a question, the public was concerned that he may suffer from some kind of mental ailment, of course you would want to reassure the public that you're fine, especially after that debate. What Biden said was, well, he had a bad night. He was tired. Well, first of all, he had a whole week to rest up at Camp David, and somehow he was tired for the debate, right? Or he didn't feel well. Okay, so you had a bad night. You look to the entire world like you got dementia, right? There's all these rumors. Everybody is saying you got to step down. The first thing I would do, well, let me tell you, I'm going to have a test. I'm going to have a cognitive test. I'm going to have somebody evaluate me so I have some proof that I'm fine, right? That's what I would want to do. That's what anybody would want to do, right? And the American public deserves the truth. They're not sure. They saw that debate. It was a disaster. Biden owes it to the public to have an independent examination, but he refuses. And in fact, all he told George Stephanopoulos was, I have a cognitive test every day. No, he doesn't. What's his cognitive test that he has? Well, that he exists, that he's the president. I mean, it's ridiculous that he's basically thumbing his nose at the American public. No, I am not going to prove to you that I don't have any cognitive disabilities. Just take my word for it. Well, why should they take his word for it? Yeah, and they've been lying about it. Everybody's been lying about it for so long. So I think the president did more harm than good with this interview. I think a lot of people that watched it will have the same impression as me. He can't even remember whether or not he watched the debate, and he refuses to take a mental test. It's like when somebody is telling the truth and you say, well, you take a lie detector, you take a polygraph. Sure, where is it? Hook me up. I'll take a polygraph, right? But if you're lying and someone says, well, you want to take a polygraph test? No, I'm not taking one of those. I don't believe in those. They're not accurate, right? Liars never want to take a polygraph, but somebody who's telling the truth, they demand it. Give me a polygraph, right? So if Joe Biden believed that he could pass the cognitive test, he'd be the first one to demand it. The reason he doesn't want to take one is because he knows he'd fail. In fact, I'm sure he's taken several and failed them all, right? That's why he doesn't want to take another one, because he knows he can't pass. So he has to continue to lie about his abilities. And then, of course, what I detest most is hypocrisy, right? So if I want to say that Donald Trump tells lies, that's okay because I tell the truth. And a lot of his lies are just, you know, puffery. He exaggerates a lot. I mean, there are some lies, but a lot of it is just exaggeration. And that's, Trump steaks, the greatest steaks in the world. Of course, he knew they weren't the greatest steaks in the world, but he's trying to sell his steaks. So he's trying to sell himself. I'm the greatest president in the world. We have the greatest economy in the history of the world, right? He's just talking, right? It's puffery. But Biden tells a lot of outright lies. I mean, complete lies. He has no right to call anybody a liar, right? When you do something yourself, you can't accuse somebody else. It's not just, living in glass houses and not throwing stones. I mean, Biden has been in politics all of his life. And you don't stay in politics without being a liar. I mean, you're not going to have a long political career unless you're a good liar. I mean, you got to lie a lot to get reelected that often. And so he has no right to keep focusing on Trump lying, Trump lying. In fact, the reason he wants to talk about Trump lies so much is because that's what he does. His whole presidency is a lie. Everything out of his mouth is a lie. I mean, he lied for years when he was, the big guy getting kickbacks under the table from Hunter Biden and the rest of the family as they were peddling his influence all over the world and then laundering the money through all these different accounts. So he's not only a liar, he's a traitor, he's a criminal, yet he's going to accuse Biden. So I thought that that his showing there, if that was a Hail Mary, it didn't complete. In fact, it was intercepted and it was run back the other way for a pick six. So something's probably going to happen. Either he's going to step down or get pushed out. But again, he should resign from office. I mean, if Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee, she might as well be the president and then run for reelection. And in fact, if Biden stepped down and Harris became the president, she would be the first woman president in history. So they've been trying to get a female president. And Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the first female president, didn't make it. So Kamala Harris could be the first female president right now if Biden steps down. Now, I don't know, if they would count a man who identified as a woman. If he ran and got elected, would they count? Because they'd have to, right? They'd have to say, hey, we got the first female president, because they couldn't discriminate between people who are born women and people who identify women. So who knows? But Harris could be the first woman president if Biden steps down. Then she would run for reelection, and she would most likely lose to Trump. Now, there's some other political news that I want to mention on the other side of the pond in the UK, because they had a landslide defeat for the incumbent Tory party, and Labour had a huge upset. I think this is the biggest loss that the Tories have suffered. This is the Conservative Party. in the UK. Now, conservative in the UK is still pretty liberal, right? Because their whole thing shifts left when you move to that side of the Atlantic. But this is the worst defeat in 190 years. And the Labor Party, in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, has a massive majority in the UK. And this kind of bucks the trend of what was happening in France and Italy, where they were moving to the right because they had left governments in power and they moved to the right. And in the UK, they're going from the right to the left. But what I think is really going on here in all these countries and what's going to happen in the United States and why, again, I think Trump is going to win is the European economy is bad. They have stagflation, just like we do, because the ECB made the same mistakes as the Fed, and European governments, especially during COVID, but even before COVID, were running big deficits and spending too much money. And so the economies all over Western Europe and the United States are screwed up. And the people are not happy. They're suffering. Their real wages are falling. The cost of living is soaring, and they want to throw the bums out. So whoever is the incumbent, that's who they want to get rid of. Anybody who's promising change, who's new, that's going to get the vote. So that's why you're seeing everything flip. And that's why you're going to see the same thing happen in the United States. The party that's in charge is the Democratic Party. Biden is the president. Harris is the vice president. And so when they go up for reelection, the public is not going to want 4 more years, just like they didn't want a continuation of the status quo in the UK. They didn't want it in France. They didn't want it in Italy. They don't want it in the United States. As I said earlier, we have high unemployment and we have high inflation. The government is lying about it. The media is lying about it. The Democrats are lying about it, but the people are suffering through it. And those lies don't change the circumstances that the voters are in. And in fact, even this week with the weak economic data, the price of oil was still up 2.1% on the week. We're closed at $83 a barrel. Again, I think oil prices are going to end the year significantly higher. We could head above 100 by the time voting starts. We would have been up 3% on the week, but oil prices dropped 0.9% on Friday. So we were ahead even more until Friday. But these are very bad numbers. As I said, unemployment has rarely been higher in American history. Again, it has never been higher in the 1950s or the 1960s. In the 1970s, there were only 2 years, and the 1980s only 3 years, and that was the early 80s. So over, again, the 40-year time period from 1950 to 1990, you had 5 years where unemployment was higher than it is now, 35 years where it was lower. And again, you go back to the 1940s, you only had 2 years where it was higher. That was the end of the Great Depression. The other 8 years, it was lower than it is right now. So we have a lot of unemployment, and we have a lot of people who are employed in multiple jobs who don't want all these jobs, who probably curse Biden under their breath as they go to work in the evenings or on the weekends when they'd rather be enjoying leisure. They're stuck doing a mundane job because that's the only way they can pay the rent or put food on the table. And then you have a lot of people who aren't even in the workforce because they've completely become discouraged and aren't working, but they're still seeing a big increase in their cost of living. Everybody's debt is exploding. Credit card debt, record highs, household debt, record highs, and the savings rate has plunged. If you have a lot of savings, you have a cushion. You can feel better about your circumstances if you have a safety net to fall back on. If you don't, if there's a huge hole in that safety net because you blew through all your savings, you're not comfortable. And Americans are not comfortable at all. They are very economically distressed and they want to do something about it. I mean, I think even more people would be voting for Trump if it wasn't for a lot of the negative media the way they portray Trump. I mean, they keep talking about, oh, he led the insurrection. He tried to overthrow the government. He tried to overthrow the election, as if he actually did any of that. They keep repeating that lie over and over again as if it was true. He did the same thing that Hillary Clinton did. Hillary said, I didn't lose. Trump cheated. There was collusion with Russia. That's why he won. I mean, a lot of people are sore losers, but it's not just a sore loser. You're running for the highest office in the land. Trump is like, hey, how could I have lost? It doesn't make any sense. Maybe it was rigged. Maybe all the votes weren't counted. Maybe it wasn't fair. He had a right to question the outcome of the election. He never encouraged a violent mob. In fact, to the opposite, he said, "Be peaceful. We're the party of law and order. Respect the men in blue. Right? Go peacefully. Right? No violence." In fact, he reminded everybody at the debates that when he knew that a lot of people were coming to Washington D.C., he called up and spoke uh, to was it Nancy Pelosi, I think, and said, "Hey, how'd you like 10,000 National Guard? I'll send them to protect the Capitol to make sure things don't get out of hand." And she said, "No, we don't want the National Guard. We don't want that extra protection." Why? Well, because she probably wanted things to get out of hand. They probably saw that as their opportunity, right, to stage this whole thing and blow it out of proportion. But again, if Donald Trump really was leading a coup d'etat and he was trying to overthrow the government, why would he offer to send 10,000 National Guardsmen to protect the very government that he was supposedly trying to overthrow? I mean, the whole thing was nonsense. I said it at the time. Nobody showed up with weapons. They showed up with cell phones, right? They were taking selfies. This was not a violent revolution, right? The only person killed was a civilian who was shot in the back by a Capitol policeman. Nothing happened to that guy, right? In fact, he happened to be black. The person he shot happened to be white, a woman. But imagine if it was the reverse. If it was a white guy who shot a black woman, it would have been a huge thing, and the guy'd still probably be in jail right now. But no, if the media wasn't bombarding people with all these lies about Trump, I think he'd have even more support. In fact, what I think is going to happen, I think there's a lot of people who, because of the imputations, right? If you say you're for Trump, it's like, what's wrong with you, right? People are embarrassed to say they're in favor of Trump. But when they go into the polls, they'll vote for him. Why? Because they can't stand the economy and they want it to be better. In fact, when I was on a plane flying down this morning from Gdansk, Istanbul, there was a magazine on the plane, an economist magazine. So I happened to skim through it, and there was an article there warning people not to support Trump, warning millionaires, billionaires, the people who are backing Trump. The article said, you're making a mistake. This is bad for the economy. And the argument was, if Trump became president, it would run up the deficits because he's going to cut taxes, and we're going to have more inflation because the tax cuts are going to be inflationary. So we need to reelect Biden, as if Biden's not going to run up the deficits. What has Biden done? He's run up the deficits. So we can't vote for Trump because we might have bigger deficits. So we should vote for Biden. Well, we'll probably have even larger deficits. I mean, according to the economists, the only thing that's going to fuel inflation is tax cuts. Well, what about spending increases? That's probably going to fuel even more inflation. I mean, I agree, we're probably going to have more inflation. In fact, we're going to have more inflation regardless of who wins, whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden. But the Economist writes an article as if the risk is that Trump is the one that causes big deficits and more inflation, when actually the deficits are going to be bigger under Biden and the inflation probably even higher. Now, I mean, maybe not. I mean, when the Republicans get control of everything, it's possible. But I think, from what I could tell, and the way the government has been spending, that Biden will be an even bigger spender, at least try to be, in his second term, or Harris would be an even bigger spender in her first term. Remember, if Harris becomes president and then she wins, she actually could run a second time, because you can be president more than 2 terms if you are not elected, because the constitutional amendment says you can't be elected more than twice. So Harris can be president for a year or whatever, half a year, and then be president, run again, get reelected. Of course, she's probably not even going to get elected the first time, let alone let alone reelected. Um, but it's clear that it would be even worse. But that the Economist is so biased, right? That they're saying, hey, we got to vote for Biden because he's the more fiscally responsible candidate, that Trump is going to be too reckless and we're going to have too much deficits. In fact, they did point to the tariffs that Trump is going to want to impose, but Biden didn't get rid of them. The Trump tariffs are still here. So it's not like Biden got rid of them. And yes, if Trump imposes more tariffs, that's a tax increase, but that would offset some of the other tax cuts. Right. So, they're criticizing Trump for wanting to cut taxes when it comes to income taxes, but then they're also criticizing him for wanting to raise taxes when it comes to tariffs. Well, you can't have it both ways because tariffs are going to raise revenue. Now, they don't raise as much revenue as the cost of the tariffs because a lot of times people just buy more expensive products that are imported from other countries. But if you just impose a tariff across the board, it would be more effective. If you target it to certain countries, then the government doesn't raise as much money as if you just apply the same tariff to all imports. And then the government gets more of the revenue. But that would offset the revenue that they lose from income tax cuts. And income tax cuts are more growth oriented. So it's better dollar for dollar. It's better for the government to collect money from tariffs than the income tax. In fact, prior to the income tax, again, that was the government's primary source of revenue. It was tariffs. And they passed the 16th Amendment in order to lower tariffs. And we got an income tax to replace tariffs. That's how they sold it to the country, because the government said, hey, if we can get rid of the tariffs, the average American won't have to pay any taxes because the income tax is only going to go to the rich. It's just going to hit Carnegie and Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, right? It was a soak the rich campaign. And unfortunately, the American public bought it because it was the middle class that ended up getting soaked by the income tax, not the rich. Now, the rich can find ways of avoiding it, but the middle class can't. And so the middle class is paying much higher income taxes today than they ever paid in tariffs prior to the 16th Amendment being ratified. That's why you always want to be fearful of Democrats promising new taxes that are only going to hit the rich. That's just what they say to get the middle class to vote for the taxes. But the minute they get the power, they end up using the tax and imposing it on the very people that voted for it and thought that they were going to be exempt, right? You end up getting snared in your own net, right? So you never want to get into bed with the government because you know what they're going to do to you. Anyway, that's it for today's podcast. Again, if you liked it, don't forget to give me the thumbs up, add a comment. Sometimes I do, you'll notice I do comment on people's comments. Keep them short and sweet. If you put a long comment, I tend not to have the time to read it. I'm going to try to keep doing these podcasts from the road. I'm going to be traveling for another 2.5 weeks or so, and then I will be back in Connecticut on July 21st. Bye for now.